All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Screen Review. Again, my name is Megan.
I'm Dina.
Today, we're going to be reviewing the movie Snowpiercer, available on Netflix. This movie came out in 2013. It's rated R, and it is a little over 2 hours long. I will go ahead and point out, though, this movie is a little bit on the violent side, so if you're not a fan of that, I would kind of steer clear. As always, though, throughout the show, we're going to give a quick spoiler-free review for those who have not seen the movie yet before we jump into the more finer details. So, before we begin, essentially the plot of this movie is that it's a post-apocalyptic frozen Earth where the last survivors of humanity are on a train divided by social class. So, Dina, what did you think of the movie?
Honestly, love the movie. Something that about the movie that I loved is that you go into it thinking it's just like one of those dystopian sci-fi type movies, I went into it and I was like, oh, Hunger Games, and it's definitely something you wouldn't expect at all. I mean, same director who directed Parasite, who we know did win Best Director this past Oscars and Best Movie and a bunch of other awards. And so the movie, it was just a really good movie, honestly. It was definitely unexpected turns. And overall, the movie kind of just takes in like this whole like idea of class and like the separation of the classes, similar to that of like Parasite, his other movie, which I thought was interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like you said, I mean, going into the movie, I was like, okay, like, the lead actor is Chris Evans. Like, it'll just be like an action sci-fi movie. Like, I'm not really expecting much. I figured because he is the same director of Parasite, there would be almost like a twist to it. And it really was not what I was expecting at all. Like, if you go in, of course, it's action packed. Of course, it's an exciting movie. But it definitely has some deeper nuances in there that you don't expect. And if you look at it kind of with that lens on the whole time, you almost see a different movie in a sense. Like
For sure.
like the colorization of some scenes to kind of divide the social classes in the train cars, etc. It's really interesting. The perspective of the lens during important scenes is something that I paid attention to, and I found it to be interesting the whole time. The sound design of the movie, just everything I feel like was really interesting to kind of take a little bit of a closer look at.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. So I guess now we'll just go into kind of like our actual more in-depth review. So if you haven't watched the movie yet, just take a minute, watch the movie. It's on Netflix. It's really good.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of get into it. So do you want to start that?
Sure. Yeah. So again, definitely recommend this movie. I can't say enough good things about it. But kind of going from the very beginning of the movie, what it is, it's a black screen, and you see kind of snow falling through the screen, kind of going down towards the bottom right corner, and all you hear is this voiceover of like overlapping newscasters and leaders talking about releasing something called CW7 into the atmosphere to bring down global warming temperatures to make the Earth more habitable. And it kind of does this, and then you see these planes dispersing the CW7 into the sky. And then you see that soon after the disbursement of the CW7, the world froze and life became extinct. And you kind of see this train. And it then says, the precious few aborted the rattling Ark, a high-speed snow train, and they're humanity's last survivors. So now you find out that our movie takes place 17 years later after this disbursement of CW7. We're now in 2031.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I like the first thing I noticed when I watched the movie was that they called it the rattling ark, kind of like Noah's Ark, type of thing. But anyway, so it's now 2031, which is very interesting to think that this movie came out in 2013, kind of talking about how global warming kind of took a turn in 2014. We're in 2020, so it's just kind of like this weird, like, with every movie about the future, it kind of feels like that. But basically, after this whole like newscaster type moment, we kind of get into this scene where we see guards and like all these people who look dirty, honestly, in this kind of like dark, very like gray type lighting, being counted, I guess you could say, which is the first thing I thought of when I saw that was kind of like an overpopulation type thing, like they're counting their citizens, and then you go straight in and you see them have these things called protein, like they get their food, these dirty people that are in this like weird lighting, they go get their food called protein blocks. They look disgusting,
They
honestly.
do. Yeah, they're like little rectangular, like gelatinous black thing. Like they're
Looks
just
like
not.
rubber.
It
It
does
looks
look like rubber.
it looks unedible. It's like looks disgusting, right?
Hmm.
And so they kind of like eat these like gross things, and next scene you see is like these kids running around, and they're looking for a specific protein block kind of thing, right? And the main character, Curtis, right? That's his name, played by Chris Evans, the all well loved in action movies. He's like running around. He's trying to get this kid named Timmy, get his protein block specifically. And they kind of have this like funny little like I guess bargain, barter type thing. It's kind of cute, honestly, because it's like this little kid, and they get this protein block, and there's like a note inside of it, right? Yeah. You want to continue?
Yeah, definitely. I will mention though, before this happened, is that the armed guards, they did ask, like among the crowd during this whole, head count thing, they asked, are any of you experienced violinists? Can't pronounce that word today. And then a man and his wife stepped forward, and they're like, oh, we played for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Like, we are experienced violinists. We can help you out. And they're like, oh, we only need one. And so they want to take the husband, and he's like, well, no, I don't want to go without my wife. Like, I don't want to leave her back here, because we kind of alluded to that they'll take him to the front of the train and he'll never be back, essentially. So he says, I don't want to go without my wife. And this is kind of the first instance you see like a real violently heavy scene, we'll say. So they kind of beat the wife and then steal the husband away. So this is kind of the first case where you think like, oh, geez, like these guards are a little bit intense. Like, besides just the head count thing where the population control it's kind of alluded to, it's the first case where you're like, oh, wow, like this probably isn't a good life. If the protein blocks weren't convincing, if everyone covered in like rags and dirt, if it wasn't convincing, you can see just the overly violent scenes. Yeah. But then going back to Curtis and Timmy trying to bargain for this thing, you see eventually Curtis gets a little protein block, and there's like almost, it kind of looks like a little scroll almost in there. And you see there's a name written in there. And so then Curtis goes to one of his mentors, you say, as Dina says, like his father figure in the movie. His name is Gilliam, and there's a name written on there. And they realize, kind of alluded to again, that they're planning something, and they need this person that's on the slip, because he is an experienced, I guess, engineer, you could say. He designed all the security locks in the entire train. And so it's again mentioned here how Gilliam and Curtis are kind of planning to take over the train and kind of make their way to the front and take over the owner of the train. His name is Wilford.
Yeah. And then, so after they like allude to this whole like plan they have, it's the next scene in which they're once again in this like room where you saw them initially getting like counted on, or whatever. What is it, like
a head count, bed check, one of those. Yeah.
Something like that. And you see them ask for basically all the children, kind of, and you're like, what? And
yeah, for a medical inspection.
Yeah, for a medical inspection, which is kind of like, oh, okay, you want the kids, and you're already like, oh, something children, they're asking, like, you're already like, oh, bad government, what's going on? And so all these kids kind of step forward, and the first thing I noticed is that all these kids were like so like lethargic. They're so like silent, and they're kind of just calm, while these parents are like, don't take my child type of thing. Like, I don't want you to look at my child. But like all the kids are kind of just like, peace out. Like, I'm just gonna go to these random government officials. And this lady in like this yellow coat, she like takes out this tape measure and starts like measuring the children's sizes. Like, what? And most notable was these two parents. One of which, you first see this man, this father, who throws a shoe at one of these government officials as he's taking his child, which is like a huge thing, like, oh, you're lower class, you can't touch us first class people, you know what I mean? And then the second was this lady whose son is Timmy, the kid that they took the note out of the protein block from, and she's like hiding him under his dress, and then eventually, there's like this whole scene where the lady in yellow is kind of like lifts up her skirt, looks away. Then the mother's like, run, Timmy. And then, they get him, obviously. And coincidentally, those are the two kids that the government officials take with them, and you never see them again, basically. So that was like kind of an emotional scene. And it was just so weird how like calm and the kids kind of looked, Maybe it's just because they were kid actors and they were like, but I feel like that was intentional to make accepting of like, this is my fate type of thing.
Yeah, it almost seemed like they were already defeated because, I mean, it's 17 years since the Earth was frozen because you can assume then that they've been on this train for 17 years because they've survived. So these kids had to have been born on the train if you think about that. So if this is the only life that they've known, I mean, it kind of makes sense that they're a little bit defeated just based on everything that you're seeing, like the protein blocks they've been eating their entire life, essentially, the dim lighting, clothes. I mean, it doesn't look like they bathe really. There's no quality of life living in the back of the train like they are. I will mention.
Also, and then they don't have education, the kids.
Very true.
So they don't, I guess, they're not very, they don't really understand social and whatever. Like, there's so many things that you get from an education that they don't have, which kind of makes you think, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I will also mention that this lady in yellow that comes in, this is the first person that we've seen wear any color the whole time. Like everyone else is wearing neutrals the entire time. Everyone in the back of the train, even the guards are wearing like their uniforms that were all like black, neutral colors, nothing crazy. And this woman's wearing a bright yellow coat, like her hair is freshly done, like she's wearing makeup. And this is kind of the first glimpse we get into seeing, life at the front of the car, you could say, in front of the train, you could say. She has access to all these things. But like Dina said, yes, these two kids, Timmy and Andy, do get taken by this lady after Andy's dad threw a shoe at her, and you can see she's bleeding on the head. And so then after this scene, obviously, you can't, exactly, Dina said, you can't touch upper class, like, you can't do that, you can't even throw things at us. So then this lady comes in, I guess, Minister Mason, we'll say, and she gets 7 minutes allotted for her speech. And there's a reason that she gets these 7 minutes allotted is because they take Andy's dad, the little boy that got taken, his father, they take him, they put some kind of special cream on his arm, they do a little bit of calculations, and they say, like, oh, at this altitude, it'll take 7 minutes. And then they stick his arm outside of the train window. Well, not really a window, kind of like a slot, I guess, because there are no windows where they are. And so they, it can kind of be seen that it would take 7 minutes for his arm to freeze solid. And so that's the amount of time they gave Minister Mason to deliver this speech.
Yeah. And so in this speech, well, first you see kind of Andy's dad put his arm in. He's already like, you can see the fear in his eyes type of thing. And all of these, I guess they call them freeloaders, the lower class people, they kind of just watch in a sense. And during this Minister Mason's speech, first thing I noticed when she walked into the room was she was wearing a fur coat in purple, which if you think about it, fur coat is supposed to be a sign of wealth as well as the color purple, because I believe there's like this whole thing where kings and queens used to wear purple because it was like the most expensive dye, something like that. So it's kind of like this immediate kind of like show that like she is of wealth, she is of upper class type of thing. And essentially the whole speech was basically putting these lower class citizens in their place. She starts with this line that I thought was funny. She says, "I am a hat, you are a shoe," because Andy's dad threw a shoe at them, right? So she's like, "I am a hat, you are a shoe. I belong on the head, you belong on the foot." The foot meaning either you're stepped on, the foot meaning you are the tail, you are in the back of the train, you're lowest class. I mean, it essentially just means that they are at the bottom, And something that they tend to mention a lot is this phrase, your particular preordained position. They do this like hand movement where they're like particular preordained position, like very specific.
Yeah.
And so she kind of just says like, you get kind of more of a glimpse of life pre-train, where she mentions how essentially people bought tickets to get on the train. So there were first the people who bought first class, the people who bought economy, and then the people who just got on the train. They're called freeloaders. Those are the people we see as the lowest class. So she kind of basically tells them like, oh, keep your place type of thing. Like, your place, whatever. And so then she kind of like tries to get the leader of the train, the man who created the train, the man who created their sacred engine, they call it the sacred engine of the train. His name is Wilford, and they try to get him. Minister Mason tries to get him to like speak to the citizens that are the freeloaders. And she kind of tries to get it through like the speaker or something, whatever. And she's like, oh, well, the connection down here is really bad, like from the front of the train to the tail of the train, which I thought was kind of like interesting to kind of show how like there is no relationship between the government and kind of like the lowest class, like their government and their lowest class citizens. Like they're literally on opposite sides of the spectrum, not just like class wise, but like literally like they physically cannot walk towards each other, kind of, in a sense. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it was also interesting. I mean, like you said, Minister Mason says, know your place, keep your place, be a shoe. And also that was interesting. I mean, this is kind of a major point throughout the whole thing, is that Wilford himself does not come to the back of the train. That's why he sent Minister Mason to come, because he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to go. So I just think it's interesting, that the leader, the creator of their sacred engine couldn't even be bothered. One of his, front of the train people got assaulted. He couldn't come down and deliver this speech himself. He sent someone else to do it. So at this point, it's been the full 7 minutes of the speech, and they take, and I think his name is Andrew's arm out of the little slot they had. There's Andy's dad, and it's frozen solid. Like, they tap a spoon on it, and it's audible. You can hear it because his arm is frozen solid. And then they take like a big mallet thing, and then they just shatter his arm in front of everyone.
Yeah, that was
yeah, it was. And because you think like you just the arm being frozen solid is punishment enough, but they had to.
And everyone has to watch.
Everyone has to watch, and that's the thing. People were saying like, I don't want to watch this. Like, can we do something? And Curtis was talking to his friend you see throughout the movie, Edgar, and he's like, no, like, not yet. Don't do anything, not yet, because all these guards are there. Like, they're all armed. Like, what can they do? So then Gilliam comes out of the back, who's just the father figure to Curtis, just this old man. He's like a peg leg. He walks in, and then he says, I want to speak with Wilford. I want to speak with Wilford. And Minister Mason says, like, oh, talk through me. Like, he won't come down here. And then he said, no, like, take me to the front. I want to talk to him. And so then at that point, as Gilliam was coming forward, Curtis noticed that she told some of the guards who were going with their guns pointing at Gilliam, she said, put down that useless gun. And Curtis took that to mean that there are no bullets. The bullets are extinct on the train because they can't manufacture them there. And that he thinks that all the guards used all the bullets in the last revolt. So this is kind of the first time you hear that there have been previous attempts at a revolution from the people in the back of the train.
Which is weird to think about, because they've only been on the train for 17 years, and you already kind of get this allusion towards another uprising there was, maybe, who knows, 5 years prior, maybe, not that long prior. 17 years already known to revolutions is kind of like, there's got to be something wrong, with this kind of government system. And then kind of the next notable scene was the scene in which, first they're like, you see them building something, kind of. They get all of these like kind of bucket type things, I guess you'd say, crates, and no, buckets, I would say.
Like barrels almost.
Barrels. And you see them, everyone, mostly like the older men of the train car, kind of gathering all of these barrel type things and connecting them. And then out of nowhere, the alarms go off, and they weren't expecting the alarms to go off because the security guards came into this car. So they had to like hide all their things, whatever. And then there's this scene in which the main character, they're like hiding these barrels they have, whatever. And then there's this scene where Curtis realizes like, oh, they don't have bullets. Like, he finally like kind of puts the two and two together, and he's like, they definitely don't have bullets. And he literally walks up to one of the security guards, and the security guards puts the gun to him. He takes the gun in his hand, puts it to his head, and like, pulls the trigger, and nothing comes out. And then he immediately says, run, in the most fast-paced, like, it was such like a fast-paced, like such a good scene. Like, I loved it so much. It was just so fast-paced, and like, you understood it, but at the same time, it was like you didn't know where to look, because immediately all of these freeloaders, I guess, just charge. They take these connected barrels they have, and they ram it through the car doors, because basically they're kind of stuck in the back of the train because these doors, they can't open them themselves. They're like electronic between the cars. So they kind of like jam this like, connected barrels all together through all these doors of the cars, and they kind of go through, and it's just so action-packed, so gruesome. They kill every single guard they see in their way until they get to the prison car, which is where this man Nam is, who is like this, who created the security system of the train.
Yeah, and this was the one whose name was on that little slip of paper that they found in Timmy's protein block. I will also say, like, that scene was really crazy to watch. Like you were saying, I didn't know where to look. Even like the camera through filming was like shaking the whole time, I think, to add a little extra layer of chaos almost. Because I mean, they were just running for their lives essentially. You know, they didn't plan to revolt today. It just seemed to have been the best opportunity to do that. Because if they had, you know, kind of done the head count as planned, as the guards came in to do, they had to sit down for their head count. And if they all sat down, then the giant barrel line would kind of be exposed. So this caused them, you know, we have to do this now.
It was just such a crazy scene. Like,
it really was. Yeah, this whole entire movie, I mean, the action scenes are just, you like you're saying, you don't know where to look. Everything happens really fast. It's really interesting to watch. I'm not even really a huge fan of action movies, I can say, but I'm a fan of this one, to be honest.
Sure, yeah.
So then, yeah, you get to the prison section, and then what I thought was interesting is that they're not prison cells necessarily. It almost looks like a morgue.
Yeah,
like, you know, kind of has, it has those like pull out kind of things where, you know, you put people who have died on the little slabs, and that's how they keep the prisoners there. And so they find the NAM slot in there, and they have this key ring kind of thing. They took off a guard. And so Edgar, Curtis's kind of right-hand man, best friend, is trying all the different keys into the lock to see which one would work. And eventually they get it open. And they find that NAM is in jail for being, what's the drug called?
Chronal.
Yeah, he's an addict, essentially. And that's why he is in the prison cell. So they wake him up by taking these little pieces of Chronal, because earlier in the movie, you saw Curtis trade with another one of the back of the train passengers for little 10 uncut pieces of Chronal or something, which you come to find out is just essentially industrial waste that a lot of people in the back of the train and in the upper part of the train, they're all pretty much addicted to, you know. So then they wake him up by kind of waving one of the pieces of Chronal in front of his face. And so then he gets up. He does not speak much English, but he uses a translator for some of the points of when he's talking, and mostly not, though. He kind of just speaks and hopes people will understand, essentially.
And
so
they do.
they do pretty much. I mean, it's not really explained, but they just do. So the first thing he does, essentially, is pull out a little pack of cigarettes from his pocket, and everyone's shocked because they're like, oh, cigarettes have been extinct for 10 years, and he has 2 left, and he just takes out one, and that's pretty much the first thing he does. The second thing he does, essentially, is asks that they free his daughter as well. So kind of the deal they struck with Curtis, Nam, and his daughter, Yono, they struck this deal where every door that they open, they'll each get one little piece of Chronal. So that's the deal that they struck moving forward.
Yeah. And so basically, the next thing that happens is they immediately try to go open the next car door. And as they're opening the next car door, for some reason, Curtis, I believe this is the scene. Yes. Curtis asks Yono if she's clairvoyant, right? This is the scene. Yes.
I think it's the next one. Either way, though, it happens really
whatever.
soon.
It happens at one point, and he's like, "Are you clairvoyant?" to her, and she's like, yeah, I'm clairvoyant. Like, she's like, I don't know what you mean. And then, like, out of nowhere, she's like, oh my God, don't open this car door. Don't open this car door. And they open it, and it's behind the door are these people in these like black masks. And it's just like so creepy. Like, her reaction, like, it was so immediate. Like, he was like, are you clairvoyant? She opens her eyes. She's like, oh my God, don't open this car door. And as she's saying it, obviously, Nam opens the car door with his like whatever security system, whatever. And behind her are these men in like these black masks. And it's so creepy because it's like this whole army, and it's this army versus this army of freeloaders, again, they call them. And with the lighting, especially, like, it was definitely really interesting in that scene because you kind of saw, although they were in black masks, completely covered, all that wasn't covered was like their nose and their mouth, and like you didn't really see who they were. They were in like this full gear, and although they were like completely covered, they were still in this like really bright light, while the freeloaders were kind of like in this more dark light, kind of like you couldn't really see them, honestly, which was like very interesting. And it was just like they just went head to head. It was like these groups of people, Curtis in the front, whoever their leader is in the front. It was very cinematically pleasing kind of scene to look at.
Definitely. Yeah. I will say that the room they went to right before that scene, they went into kind of the room with the windows. Do you remember the room where they first saw the outside for like the first time in 17
Oh,
years?
yeah.
They had the room with all the windows. So they almost got distracted in a sense because they were all just, there are no windows in the back of the car, in the back of the train where they are. So this is the first time seeing outside for a lot of them for 17 years or for their entire lives. I mean, none of the younger kids were with them, but for a lot of them, they had not seen outside in the longest time. And so then the next section they go to, they find someone that had gotten taken from the back of the train a long time ago. His name is Paul. And his job essentially is to make these protein blocks. And this part, I am only mentioning it because it's absolutely disgusting. It's the only reason I'm mentioning it. You find out that these protein blocks, these kind of gelatinous little rectangular black blocks, they're made out of insects, ground up insects. And you find that out during this scene. It's absolutely disgusting. And you know that the people in the front class, they've mentioned it, are eating high-class dinners, steaks, wines, the whole 9 yards, really. And yet the people, the freeloaders, as you say, they're eating insects, essentially. And Curtis is up on the upper level, and he's the one that actually sees this. But all the other people that are in the revolution with him are only seeing the protein blocks coming kind of hot off the presses, you could say. And they're like, oh, they're still warm. Like, they're so good. And they're eating just a ton of them right off the conveyor belt. And so Curtis is kind of like, I'll let them have this in a sense. Instead of telling them, like, this is what we're eating, he just kind of lets it go. And then this is when they get the next little red slip. And Curtis says, oh, Paul, like, have you been writing these little slips to me? The kind of like little mini scroll things they found in the original protein block. And Paul said he hasn't been writing them. He said they just give them to me with no real elaboration on that. But this next one says water.
Yeah. And then the next scene is when they get to the room. Sorry. I forgot that middle part. That was actually kind of important. But so they get to that. Yeah. So they get to that whole fight scene, and that was like probably one of the most incredible fight scenes we keep mentioning how this movie has these crazy fight scenes and how they're so gruesome and so intense, but like out of all of them, I think this one was like by far the most incredible one. Incredible cinematography, incredible like choreography for the fighting. The music was just not the music, the sound, like whatever they did there was so good. You want to go on with that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, we're getting into the nitty gritty here. I would say it's almost needlessly violent in the beginning with the fish. I will say. So one of these guards pulls out a fish and takes kind of the axe he's holding and it just cuts into the fish. And the fish is just bleeding. And he just passes it along and they just like throw it on the floor right before the fight begins. It seemed almost needless to a sense, but I guess it was just them saying, we're here to do this.
It was so weird though, because like it was like they were like staring at each other, these two teams, the guys in the masks and our, revolution, the people that were on the side of, I guess you could say, they're kind of staring at each other, and then the guys with the masks just like cut this fish open and they immediately just start fighting. Like they take that as like oh, this is real. He cut a fish open.
Like, let's go, I'm ready.
It was like so weird, but like and so like gruesome and like kind of gross to look at, but like also like kind of like, oh, interesting little touch there,
Definitely.
Sure.
I will say that when they get into the fight, I mean, obviously, like we said, this movie's kind of violent, so there are, it's kind of blood going everywhere in a sense. And I will say that I thought it was most interesting how, like, when the blood would get on the windows almost, and it was kind of just against the white snowy background, and that's kind of mostly what you saw throughout the whole time. And then
no, you go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, in the middle of the fight, the leaders suddenly kind of stop and announce, they're like, oh, we're crossing the bridge now. And then all the guys with the axes, they immediately stop and they start counting down, kind of like raising their axes in the air, counting down. And then as soon as they count down to 0, they say Happy New Year in the middle of the revolutionary fight. I was so surprised to have that happen.
Yeah, I realized later that it wasn't actually like the new year. It was like the new year as in regards to like how long they've been on this train, which I didn't realize in the beginning. But again, this was my second time watching it. I was like, oh wait, this isn't like New Year, like New Year. It's like a new year that they're on the train, which I thought was interesting. But after that, there's like, or like, I think right before that, actually, there's this scene where the main character Curtis is fighting, and it is like such a beautifully shot scene. It's like he's fighting nonstop, like violently fighting in slow-mo, like in like the slow motion, like there's this like pretty music playing. It's kind of like a montage set type scene, and it feels so heroic and epic, but at the same time it's so gruesome and like terrifying to watch. You know what I mean? And after this whole montage kind of ends, after he's himself, Curtis, you can kind of see Chris Evans kind of show the characters in this kind of like trance, so to say, of just killing people left and right type of thing. His friend Edgar kind of just like stares at him, and you can't really, personally, I couldn't tell if it was in awe or in terror. It was kind of like this kind of expression where he was kind of just like, what did I just see? But also like, I love what I just saw kind of thing. Kind of like, oh, I'm so happy I'm part of this revolution and I can call this guy my friend type of thing. Because it's kind of mentioned earlier in the movie that Edgar kind of looks up to Curtis in a sense as like an older, father figure, not father, like a brother kind of thing. So he was kind of looking at Curtis like, whoa, like this is my hero. But it was so terrifying. It was an insane scene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It definitely was.
Mm-hmm.
So I would mention earlier, like you were saying, when we kind of get a little deeper earlier in the movie into the dynamic between Curtis and Edgar, I will say that this scene, they were kind of almost having a heart-to-heart. They were like on bunk beds almost, with Curtis on the top and Edgar below, and they were talking, how Curtis wants Gilliam to be the next leader once this revolution goes through, but Edgar says, Curtis, I think that you've always been kind of the leader that we needed. And I think that the shot they chose to use was so interesting because it was almost like a bird's eye kind of view where you see, Curtis on the top and you see Edgar kind of peeking out from below on these bunk beds. So it just shows like how much, literally and kind of emotionally Edgar looks up to Curtis in this scene.
Yeah, for sure. So after this scene, after, you see this fight scene with Curtis and Edgar looking at him in awe, and then they kind of do this countdown thing for the new year. They go through these like glaciers of some sort, like on their track. Still, they're not fighting. Everyone stopped fighting for some reason in this one moment for the new year. And they kind of like go through these glaciers that are on the track, and like the whole train shakes. It's like kind of suspenseful, which is weird because you would think that the fight scene itself was suspenseful, but the actual impact that the train had onto these glaciers was more suspenseful, which was like weird. And then immediately after their new year, they realize, oh my God, there's a really long bridge. And you don't think about it, but they're on a train. So trains go under bridges and it's pitch black in the train. So they have this whole scene where now they're fighting in the pitch black, like they're fighting in the dark. And these guys, the bad guys, I guess you would say, with like the black masks, put on night vision goggles, while the other guys don't. And I'm going to say this now, Minister Mason comes in at one point during this. I don't really know. She kind of just shows up, honestly.
I think right before that, right after the new year kind of thing.
Something like that, yeah. She's like there. She's like casually is like standing in the back. She puts on her night goggles and just watches. That scene, again, incredible. This entire fight scene, again, incredible. The entire camera, the scene, the camera shoots it from as if you were looking at it through night vision goggles. And at some points, you kind of see it from the point of view of these guys in the black masks who are wearing the goggles. And it kind of looks like a video game, honestly. Like you see their arms, they're killing people, but like you also see like, your characters that you love, Edgar, Curtis, like kind of fighting, but it's like all through the point of view of this these night vision goggles, which I thought was like a really interesting kind of choice.
Mm-hmm. I definitely, yeah. Oh no, I definitely agree. And I would say when Minister Mason first comes in, she kind of walks in, she's dressed all in white, which is a change from what she was wearing before, the other day. And she says, happy Yekaterina Bridge, which is the bridge they crossed to kind of say, another year on the train. And she says, you filthy ingrates. So first thing she says when she walks in the room right before this like fight scene in the dark. Yeah. But another thing that she says, 74% of you will die, which is such a specific number. You're almost like, it's kind of random. You're like, oh, where'd she come up with this from? But surprisingly, it's really important later on.
Yeah, their preordained position, as they keep mentioning. Right.
Yeah, and this almost reinforces the idea, like Dina was saying earlier, of that population control, how they're doing the head counts, and now 74% of you will die. It seems almost like too coincidental in a sense.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, earlier when they found Nam, when they got him out of the little prison chamber, you see this little boy, Chan, takes the matches that he was using to light his cigarettes. Chan takes them and runs. And so then Curtis kind of signals to him, we need fire, we need those lights, because they're doing this fight scene in the dark. And then you see a bunch of people that are part of the back of the train kind of revolution come in with these big torches. And now suddenly, the fighting playing ground is a little bit more evened out in a sense.
Yeah, and I thought that scene was really interesting when Curtis kind of yelled out for him, because I didn't think that they were that close to where the rest of their people were, but apparently they were very close to the last kind of cart where the freeloaders are, the rest of them, and it was such a kind of motivational scene. They had this music choice that was just so uplifting and so kind of battle what is it, battle preparation music or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
I know
word for it.
I know you're talking about, but I cannot think of the word.
And so it's so motivational. He Chan, right? That's his name. He lights this match, and then he puts it on this torch, and then it's kind of passes the torch in a sense to other the older people to make them run faster and get there faster. And it was such a motivational scene kind of thing. It kind of reminded me of the Olympics, and they pass the torch. It was so I don't know, strong, I guess you could say. It was definitely very interesting, yeah.
It was interesting. And I would say, like you were saying, the music and sound comes back because it seemed almost muted in a sense during the night vision goggle sequence, in the fighting sequence. And then kind of the heartbreaking scene you'll see coming up next. It's Curtis is physically in the middle. Behind him, he has Edgar, who is taken hostage by one of the bad guys, we'll call them. And, he's not dagger to his throat, he's about to die. But then in front of him, Minister Mason was stabbed in the leg and is kind of being helped out by one of her servants, we'll say. I don't know, one of her assistants. And so now you see Curtis kind of come to this very clear-cut decision. He can either go ahead, capture and, kill or take hostage, whatever, Minister Mason, or he can go back and save his little brother figure. And Curtis broke my heart, and he chose to go after Minister Mason. So Edgar dies. Yeah. I'm gonna unnecessary.
So sad, yeah. I thought that scene was interesting just because Minister Mason, all that happened to her was, I'm not gonna say it's not painful, but she just got stabbed in the leg, in the calf, nonetheless. Not even anywhere. Obviously, it kind of just shows kind of her class, again, another class type thing where she's never been harmed in her life, while these other people are literally bleeding at the seams and continuing to fight. You know what I mean? They're dirty. They were dirty before, they're dirtier now.
They're covered in blood.
They're not just covered in sweat and dirt, they're not covered in blood mixed in with it. It's just they're in so much pain and they're continuing to fight. Meanwhile, Minister Mason gets stabbed in the leg. She cries out. She falls to the ground. Her assistant has to help her. She's kind of useless at this point. It's just get a hold of yourself.
A little bit.
It's so dramatic, yeah. And so I don't know.
And also, go ahead.
No, and also, so when Edgar gets stabbed, I thought it was kind of interesting to note that Edgar got stabbed in the back by this guy who killed him, which was interesting because Curtis kind of stabbed him in the back by choosing to not save him, which I thought was kind of ooh, he literally got stabbed in the back.
Yeah, he did. It was an interesting touch. I was kind of selfishly hoping he's not gonna die. No, he dies unnecessarily. It's fine.
It's pretty early in the movie. Also.
Very early in the movie. You can kind of tell that was going to be almost in a sense his fate in the movie. I kind of have a feeling about some characters, and I had a feeling that he was unfortunately going to die in this movie. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. I will also say that Curtis does choose to go after Minister Mason and take her hostage, and immediately once she's taken hostage, she kind of calls for a stop to the fighting. But earlier in this fighting sequence, one of her translators, kind of right-hand man kind of person, gets taken hostage, and he's Minister Mason, tell them to surrender. They'll kill me if you don't tell them to surrender. And she was sorry. She actually shrugged, and then that guy dies. One of her translator, the person that was always traveling with her, essentially. But as soon as she's taken hostage, immediately, stop fighting, surrender. It's because I'm taken hostage now. I'm the important one. So it even shows, in the front of the train, they don't really even care necessarily about each other. So it's just interesting to think about that.
Yeah,
exactly. So then after this fight scene, Gilliam, tells survivors, wash yourselves off, because now they're kind of getting towards the water section of the train. And so their original plan, once seeing water on that little tiny scroll type paper in the protein block processing section of the train, they decided, oh, look, we should just turn off the water, because if we turn off the water, then we control the negotiation, because everybody needs water to live. But then, unfortunately, Minister Mason tells them, like, turning off the water is not going to do anything, because the water flows in from the front of the train and kind of goes from the front to the back. So if you shut it off here, it's not really going to do anything. It will only harm your people. And so then at that point, they are kind of influenced by Mason to have her escort them to the front. She was like, oh, save my life, but you can kill Wilford. I'll take you up front. Don't worry about it. Like, kill him. I'm good.
Yeah. Something I thought about that scene when she was like practically begging for her life at that point is she took out her teeth. She had fake teeth. And it was so weird and random, but then when you think about it, it's kind of like her way of being like, oh, I'm not perfect. I don't have teeth, and like, I'm vulnerable. Please believe me. I'm showing you that I'm not perfect, kind of thing. Like, which makes you realize like she's so vain to the point where it's like, if she shows her imperfection type things, then like they'll believe her, because she believes that like, that's her vulnerable side, is her like lack of teeth type of thing,
Yeah.
So I just thought it showed how vain these first class people were.
Exactly. They don't even understand the type of living conditions that the people in the back of the train have been subjected to, where she thought, oh, look at me, like, I'm not perfect, like, spare my life. They would even, consider that for half a second.
Exactly, yeah.
I thought an interesting scene was, they kind of had Minister Mason in, like, handcuffs almost as they were going to escort her. So it was Curtis, it was Minister Mason in handcuffs, it was Tanya, who's Timmy's mother, and then I think one other guy, I don't remember his name, I think it was Gray or something that.
They never really mentioned his name. He was kind of just like there.
He was there. It was almost like an Edgar replacement, because it would have been Edgar, but Edgar died, unfortunately. So they brought this guy in. It was Gilliam's idea to kind of have them go forward, just them. So then, you see them traveling towards the front of the train, and they're going through like just beautiful parts of the train. Because, before, the people in the back of the train have only ever seen, the kind of squalor they were living in, like the tight quarters, just dirt everywhere. But now that they first walk in through like this beautiful garden with like a fountain, birdhouse in the middle, and Yona and Nam are with them as well. And Yona was born on the train, and so she's just taking everything in, experiencing everything she never saw.
And I thought it was just like such like an interesting juxtaposition of like how they just came out of this like although there were windows in this cart that they had this crazy fight, and it was dark, it was messy, and it was just like, this is like the first cart they go to is a greenhouse. And when you think of a greenhouse, you think of light and plants and life, and it's just like so interesting how they went from there to there. Like it was such like just such a shift in like kind of the scene and what you were looking at. And there was like an old lady knitting and like music, like this classical music. And I think it was just like such a interesting scene and probably such a culture shock for them. Yono at one point, she like, since it's a greenhouse, there's like dirt, or soil to grow the plants. And Yono has no idea what soil is. She's like, what? And then her dad, Nam, is like, oh, this is what's underneath all the snow that is outside. Like, you'll see it when, like, it was just so weird to think, like, she doesn't even know what Earth is, It
was interesting. Yeah, she even,
Earth,
like, she has no idea what it's like outside. Exactly. Like, she even looked at it, and she was like, can you eat it? And he was like, oh, like, you're a train baby. Like, you would never understand. Like, no, don't eat it, So then, they move past this beautiful greenhouse garden, and they move into like just an equally beautiful, if not more so beautiful, kind of aquarium in a sense, where it's just like all around them is just aquarium all the way. It's even more beautiful than some of the aquariums we have just normally.
Yeah, for sure.
And then they get offered, it's either January or July. I'm assuming January. I don't really know. They don't think they specify. That's their sushi season. So all these people that lived in the back of the train eating these gross protein blocks their entire life, they get to eat freshly made, prepared sushi in front of you. And so then they're all sitting there, and Minister Mason goes to take a bite of her sushi. Then Curtis kind of like yanks her handcuffs and is like, no, like, you have to eat this protein block, because he brought one with him for some reason. And then that scene is another one where she knows what's in it. And so you can just kind of see the disgust on her face as she has to take a bite of it. So
Right.
then, mhm.
I thought it was interesting how they were eating sushi, which I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure isn't sushi considered like a very high class kind of like delicacy, so to say. Fish in general, I'm pretty sure seafood is considered like a delicacy in many places. So I thought it was interesting how like they were eating like this sushi very like nicely made. They showed a shot of it, and sushi is my favorite food, and I was like, oh, that looks like really good sushi, you know? And like they showed this shot of it. It was just very interesting. Also, the fact that they went from an aquarium to a sushi bar was kind of like, so they're looking at the fish and then they kill them and then like kind
Yeah.
of it's very interesting. But yeah, that was yeah.
No, it was interesting. And then right
Mhm,
after that, you kind of move into like a slaughterhouse type area where you see
mhm,
the walls are just lined with like dozens, even more, if not more so. I would say hundreds, but that might be kind of pushing it. Just chickens
mhm.
lined on the walls. There's like pieces of like
The
cow
meat locker.
hanging. Yeah, like a
Yeah,
meat locker in a
meat
sense,
locker.
exactly. So it's just you see how much food is available on this train, yet they're forcing the people in the back of the train to eat those little insect protein blocks.
Mhm,
It must have just been so disheartening to kind of walk through that and just be like, this has been on the same train I've been on my entire life, and I've never had
mhm,
access to any of it.
mhm.
And then I guess the next most important scene will be they go into this classroom type setting.
Yeah, and it's not just it's like kids, like it's children. They look as though they're under the age of like 8 or 9. They look like
Yeah.
young kids, and it's this classroom, and it's such like a stereotypical like classroom of like happy kind of vibes. The walls are yellow. This teacher has like a blonde little curly little hairdo. They show at one point that she's pregnant. These students are like little kids, except there's this one girl who's extremely outspoken, like just annoying. Like she's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, the train will live forever. And it's like and it's interesting how they showed the kids because you kind of compare it to the kids that we saw earlier that were from the freeloader part of the train that were taken, like Timmy and Andy, who were so lethargic in the beginning, so like kind of just nonchalant about the situation they're in, while these kids are so outspoken about the situation they're in. They start saying these like random rhymes. I already forget what they were, but like basically about how the train they live on is amazing. They call it the sacred engine and how Wilford, the creator of the train, is basically their god. Like they're like Wilford is divine and like all this stuff. And they kind of show this video, which again makes you learn more about the beginning of the train. It's kind of this documentary video that they show the kids, in which it shows like Wilford, how he was like, oh, Wilford loved trains when he was younger, and he wanted to build this huge luxury train, and like he knew that what was it called, CW,
Oh,
whatever,
CW7.
CW7, that caused all the snow and whatever to freeze over the earth. He knew that it would be bad for the world and blah blah blah. And so they show it, and it's kind of such like a show of propaganda in their train to the children. This one girl who's super outspoken is like, the train is amazing, blah blah blah. And like it was so funny because when the freeloaders, not funny, but when the freeloaders came in, like Curtis, Tanya, all of them, she was kind of like, oh, they're what did she said something like, oh, they're dirty, like they shouldn't be here. Like I heard freeloaders are like, I don't know, something
Yeah, like
something like,
they're lazy, like they lay in their
yeah,
filth all
yeah,
day, like
yeah,
something
they
like
lay
that.
something rude, basically. And it was such an interesting like show of how they brainwash these kids to be like this, and like again how they're so outspoken versus the kids in the lower class who are kind of just like there. They're like, hey, like like they don't talk a lot, whatever. And then later they look out the window and the teacher's like, oh, we're about to pass the something of the seven, like the
The Frozen
uprising of
Seven,
the
or
frozen
yeah, the
seven.
Frozen Seven, the Revolt of the Seven, like two
Something
things.
like that, yeah. And so it's like these 7 people who were like frozen on a mountain, and they were like, this is the first ever revolt there ever was, which already shows you that there were 3 revolts at this point, again, in a span of 17 years. That's more than there should be. And which I thought, is very like an interesting touch. Like, okay, like they're showing these kids and they're like, oh, these uprising of the 7, these 7 people were bad. Like, why did they do this? Blah blah blah. And it was just again such a thing of brainwashing children to like be raised in a way where they believe that living on a train is the best thing ever, basically, and that Earth is horrible, and like Wilford is divine. They literally say at one point like the engine is sacred and Wilford is divine. Like,
yeah, they say that.
what?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have
Mhm.
these like all these sorts of call and response type things between the teacher and the
Mhm.
children that are so weird. She's like, "Oh, like what happens if you leave the train?" And the kids are like, "You die!" Like they're like screaming
Yeah.
it, like they're happy about it. She was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
if the train stops running, what happens?" They're like, "You die." And it's so
Yeah.
interesting to be teaching, like you were saying, like kids below the ages of like 8, 9, 10. You know, I feel like that's such a weird thing to be teaching them. They are completely brainwashed because that one little outspoken girl already sees herself as being, you know, above the people from the back of the train, and she's only like 8 or 9, like, or even
Yeah.
younger. It was just
Mhm.
really interesting to see that. And I mean,
Mhm.
like, they teach things like the revolt of the seven or the now frozen seven. You know, the teacher was like, "Oh, like this is going to be on the exam, so pay attention, like we're passing them now." And it's just
Yeah.
interesting, like on the exam that they're taking is going to be, "Oh, what happened to the revolt of the seven?" Like little kids are going to write in like, "Oh, they froze, you know, they froze to
He
death."
froze to death. Yeah.
Like
Like,
it's
what?
that's crazy.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
For
so then
sure.
the next scene, we're going to be the New Year's eggs coming from Wilford. So this guy kind of comes in with like a wheelbarrow just full of boiled eggs, and the teacher's like, "Oh, like come and get the eggs, kids. Like they're still
Might
warm.
I
Like
add,
they're." Go ahead.
before you go, this man is so creepy looking. He's bald and like his face is like this looks like an egg. Like it's so creepy. I just need to add that in. You may continue. I
No,
just
you're
need
fine.
to for the visualization how this man is such a creepy looking man. Like
He
he looks like
is.
someone who would like be some mad scientist who would like torture you. Like he just looks scary looking, you know?
He is, yeah, and he's like in a
Yeah.
weird like blue jumpsuit kind of thing. Like he doesn't really
It's so
say much
weird.
when he comes in. Like the teacher is more so just like, "Oh, kids, like come get your eggs while they're still warm." Like it
Mhm.
was just so weird. So all the kids, you know, grab their eggs. The teacher grabs a little basket to, I guess, distribute eggs later because eggs are awesome. I guess I don't know.
Mhm.
And so then Curtis gets an egg, and it has a little note in it. And the note says, you know, the little tiny scrolls he keeps finding is kind of like a recurring motif thing throughout the movie, and it says blood on it. And so then, right after that happens, the guy from the beginning of the movie, the violinist that they took out from the back of the train, he makes an appearance again, and you know he's playing violin for the kids, I guess, for like a Happy New Year celebration with all their eggs. And you can see he has like a cut on his face, and that's shown to you right as Curtis is reading the little thing that says blood. And
Mhm.
then as the scene continues, you see this guy, the creepy guy with the wheelbarrow, going in through the back, and he kind of eventually finds his way to where the rest of the revolution is, like the rest of the people that were just too injured from the other fight to go forward. And the people from the revolution see this wheelbarrow full of eggs, and they're like, "Oh, like I thought that the chicken was extinct." And the creepy guy was like, "Oh yeah, like a lot of things on this train were rumored to be extinct." And you know, the revolution leaders asked, you know, what, like what are you talking about? And then he said, "Oh, like this," and just pulls out like a semi-automatic like rifle weapon out from underneath all the eggs. And at the same time, you see like another kind of parallel with the teacher doing the same thing. And so now
Mhm.
everyone's just getting murdered, and it's just not
Yeah.
what you expected. And that's another
It's
thing
so
about this
creepy.
movie. Like some things just come out of left field.
Mhm. Like this pregnant, like beautiful looking, like very stereotypical kindergarten teacher type look just pulls out a gun like out of nowhere and just starts shooting everyone. The kids run behind her as if like you don't really see them, like they just kind of like leave, like they're not
Yeah, I don't
there
know
and
where they
like
went. It's
it's
almost
just
like they've done this before.
yeah, like exactly, like they've done this before. And something I noticed that was interesting before they enter this classroom, like what's her name, Minister Mason walks through these carts with these chains connected to these freeloaders, and no one even questions it. Like
Oh,
absolutely no one questions it. Like none of the civilians are like, wait, free I've never seen you before. Why are you here? Like they
mm-hmm.
kind of just go along with it, which I just kind of shows how like clueless they are and how again brainwashed they are to believe that like they are living in a utopia, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Which I
Yeah,
thought was interesting.
exactly. It is
Yeah.
interesting. And then at this
Mhm.
point, you know, the teacher, I think I forgot to mention earlier that Andy's dad is coming with them along with Tanya, Curtis, and that random guy.
Mhm.
They're all coming with. So at this point, Andy's dad does get shot by the teacher and he dies. And then towards the back of the train, you now see, you know, projected onto the little TV, the same TV that the little kids were watching the brainwashing video on. You see this guy in like a suit, essentially execution style, kills Gilliam. And, Curtis is watching this. This was his father figure, etc. And then Curtis, this kind of evokes something in him, you can say. And then the teacher dies as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the other guy. It was Curtis.
I think it was, or maybe it was the other guy. I don't know, but it was just a knife to the head. She died.
Exactly. And I will say this, though, like the only thing Curtis says after watching, his father figure be executed on like a live stream, essentially, was, "We go forward." That's it. That's all he said.
Which is a very, strong, like motivational type thing.
It's
like,
a very hero type thing to say.
Heroic. For sure. And then after that, he kills Minister Mason. No. Yes. Doesn't he kill Minister Mason at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. He kills Minister Mason, which was kind of like, oh, wasn't she your way of getting through these cars? But nope, he kills her, shoots her in the head, very to the point. And so they move forward, as he says. At this point, it's just Curtis, Tanya, this other random guy that we don't really, was kind of irrelevant, and Yono and Nam.
Yeah. So then at this point, Nam and Yono, they're still opening all the doors. And then you're kind of entering now like the higher class cars in a sense. You thought the aquarium was nice, the greenhouse garden was nice. These high class chambers, it's kind of like, everything is done very elegantly. You see these little like kind of train compartments almost. And, you see someone at a dentist appointment. You see someone getting like a tailor-made suit. You see someone at a hair salon. There's a pool. But then, of course, violence again. The person, I guess, that was responsible for execution style killing Gilliam. Now the train is kind of going around a bend in a sense on the track. And so it's almost like in a U shape. And so you can kind of see from one car on the opposite side of the train to the other. So this guy sees Curtis oppositely from him in this U and starts shooting through the glass at Curtis.
Yeah, and so that scene was very interesting. And so they kind of are shooting back and forth as if these civilians aren't around them. You know what I mean? Just it's between them two. And through the cracks of the glass, because obviously there's cracks in the glass, they're shooting each other. Nam notices a snowflake coming through the window. And I believe earlier that scene, he mentions to Yono that he once like spoke with this lady who was an Eskimo. Or no, when they were seeing the Revolt of the Seven, the people who were frozen, he mentioned how the leader of them was an Eskimo and he met her once and she was explaining to him different types of snow that he was cut off. And then later you see him looking at the snowflake that comes through this broken glass and he kind of stares at it and it kind of makes you wonder like, oh, he knows a lot about these other different types of snow. And, he met this Eskimo lady, like, what's going on here? Like, he's looking at it very, like, quizzically, which I thought was, kind of, like, made you kind of question it, like, oh, what does that mean? How he's staring at it,
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, in Florida, I don't know much about snow, but it is important coming later on throughout the movie. And I will say, after they're kind of shooting at each other through the glass, this snowflake scene happens. The man that's trying to kill Curtis, I don't really ever say his name. He essentially gives up and is going to walk manually to where Curtis is. But I will say this, he's kind of with two other armed guards that are with him. And then they go to like this sauna type room, I would call it. And there's like all these little separate rooms. They're all individual sauna rooms. And so the guy that's trying to kill Curtis, flings open one of the doors and like kills someone immediately. And then the two guards that he's with, one of them says, like, you just killed a front section passenger. Like, that wasn't Curtis. It wasn't anyone from the back of the train. It was just kind of an accident. And then upon hearing that guy turns around and kills the armed guard that was with him.
Yeah.
Which, again, just shows that, like, there is no, I guess, sense of loyalty, remorse, loyalty, anything along those lines among really anyone in the train, you could say, except for, maybe the people at this point in the movie in the back of the train. You know, as far as we know going in. And so then,
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, another fight scene commences in this kind of like yellow, hazy type room, and then the other guy, the guy's name we can't remember, the one that's with Curtis, kind of like the Edgar type replacement. He ends up on he gets hurt, and so he falls to the floor, and then this guy that's going to kill Curtis he shoots Tanya. I believe he shoots Tanya, or does he stab her? One of the two. He either shoots her. I think he shoots her. I think he does.
Yeah, I feel like shoots her.
I feel like he shoots her. So yeah, he shoots Tanya. She falls to the floor, and Tanya is Timmy's mother, as we mentioned earlier. And so then this whole fight scene is commencing. This guy seems to be winning in a sense, because now Curtis is on the floor as well through their fight, and he's kind of like passed out. And so then the guy goes to grab his gun, after kind of wrestling with Curtis for a while. And Curtis is on the floor almost like in a defeated kind of position, like he's not really making a movement to get up at all. So then this guy goes to grab his gun to kill him, or his knife to kill him. It was his knife. And then the the Edgar type guy, second in command, we'll call him, takes his hand and stops the knife from hitting Curtis. So he gets stabbed. I know. I hate when that happens in movies. It's a lot to watch in movies. I don't like that.
Yeah.
So he does that to protect Curtis and, in a sense, keep the revolution alive, which I thought was really selfless of him. And then, unfortunately, he gets killed too, because at this point in the movie, everyone's dying. It's very
except for Curtis, Yono, and Nam. At this point,
they're the only ones alive. But I would say that after this scene, and Curtis gets up miraculously somehow, and knocks out this guy. Looks like he killed him, but knocks him out, we'll say. And then they go over to Tanya, the three of them. Nam, Yona, and then Curtis. And Tanya's just repeating, my Timmy, because that's the whole reason that she went with them, was to save her small child. And I will say that Tanya is played by Octavia Spencer, so you know that
amazing,
it's superb. Like you just know. All I have to say, you just know it's exquisite. And Curtis tells her, we're gonna get him, we're gonna save him, and then her last words are "thank you" to Curtis, which I thought was just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Especially delivered by Octavia Spencer.
I know. She's such a good actress.
And something about the sauna scene, like that whole yellow hazy scene, I called it the yellow scene, was that it was silent. There was no music other than the panting and the stabbing and the blahness,
Yeah.
That was the only noise you heard. There was no music, no sound overlay. It was literally just panting, stabbing, grossness.
Yeah, exactly. And then after that scene ends, I noticed as well, and kind of moving into the next scene, they're entering in kind of like a club area almost. And as the three of them are kind of moving through, you see Yona grabbing like an alcohol bottle from someone, because at this point she's kind of strung out on the Cronol and now she's drinking. But they're all moving through it. And I noticed at this point, as they move through it and kind of get further into it, the music gets muted again. Like the music and noise kind of gets muted. Because I don't even think, at least Yona is, but I think that Nam and Curtis aren't really paying attention to their surroundings. They're kind of just charging forward. Like a lot of the people that they were with have died at this point, and they just want to get to Wilford. They just want to get to the engine room. That's the only thing they care about at this point.
Yeah, all that the only thing that Nam kind of notices from the outside is the Cronol, and he starts collecting it. And something I found interesting about that scene was that it was so weird to see these people living in ecstasy while they're literally kind of charging for this revolution, and these civilians have no idea. All that they care about is that this girl is stealing their Cronol and alcohol kind of thing, they don't even pay attention. Again, this motive reoccurring where the civilians are just nothing. They don't care, they don't notice. The only civilians, the only people outside the main, the core cast that you see kind of caring about anything is the people that are in the freeloader's car, which again kind of shows this thing where the people in the higher class are very selfish, extremely selfish,
Absolutely. And so then I will say that, eventually they finally get to the engine room, and then the sound starts coming back in, because you can hear just the machines kind of churning and making the noise. And they see the door with the W on it, which is where Wilford is going to be. And so then, Nam and Curtis, I guess, did they have a little fight before this or after this talk?
They had a little fight, and then this heart-to-heart type thing.
Yeah, so we'll get into the heart-to-heart. I will say this, Curtis kind of sheds light on his backstory, because throughout the entire movie, back when they're all the way back into the, kind of end of the train, I suppose, like right at the beginning of the movie, you hear kind of Curtis and Edgar speaking with one another, and Edgar's always telling Curtis, you know, oh, I think you should be the leader, like I think that you're amazing. But then Curtis always kind of, you know, shoots him down and is like, oh, like I'm not as good of a person as you think I am. And he even says the same thing with Gilliam earlier in the movie. And so now this kind of explains a little bit as to why he doesn't think that he is, you know, a good person.
Yeah, and so it's kind of, again, touches upon this whole gruesome aspect of this movie. It's really kind of gross. Before this, you know, Nam gives him the world's last cigarette because he has one more cigarette left, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's smoking this cigarette, and he's like, you know, in the beginning of the whole boarding the train type thing, there was 1,000 people in this one car for the freeloaders. And after a month, they ran out of food. They didn't have any food, right? So after a month, you know, they started to eat their weak cannibalism. They started to eat humans. And there's this line that that Curtis says that he's like, my biggest fault. And like this line is like it's about his biggest fault. And it's so dramatic in a way that it's like funny, but it's not funny. He says, I know what babies taste like. And you hear that line and you're like you don't know what to think, because it's like it's kind of, he says it so dramatically where you're kind of just like, it's funny, but like also that's not funny. Like he's eating babies, and it's like such like a weird how Chris Evans delivered that line in like a way where it's just that's all I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn about this cannibalism, and you learn so much more about his past, in which you learn that there was this one story where there was a woman and a child, and they killed the woman, and when they were about to go kill the baby, Gillian, you now hear where Gillian Stark came from, he cut off his arm and gave it to the other people, you know, that were about to kill this baby to eat. And he was like, I'd rather you hurt me than kill the baby. And so it became like this like ceremonial thing where people would cut off their limbs just to feed other people, right? And it kind of was like kind of this like figure type thing. And so something that I thought was interesting was that it was like they would cut off their limbs, and you learn later that Curtis apparently was the one who killed the child's mom, and that child was Edgar. And you're like, wait a minute, what? So it makes sense this whole time why Curtis was so guilty, with Edgar being his kind of like, with Edgar looking up to him because he's the one who killed his mom. So it was like, like gross.
I know. In this whole like entire kind of monologue scene where Chris Evans as Curtis is kind of just explaining, you know, how he got to where he is. And, you know, what you're saying, the line about, you know, I know the babies taste best, in a sense, is what he said. You know, he kind of sets up that line by saying, you know what I hate about myself? Yeah. Like, that's the number one thing. Exactly. You can tell that just haunts him to this day. In a sense, I mean, it'll show you that, like, you know, in extreme survival situations, I mean, it's not surprising that we all, you know, kind of become the worst versions of ourselves. And Curtis definitely sees that in himself. And the fact that, you know, he saw Gilliam sacrificing his arm for this little baby, I think that kind of almost sparked something in him to change and be better. But he did also mention that, like, he himself was never able to cut off his arm or leg to sacrifice it to give to anyone else. He was like, I tried, but like I was never able to do it. And so then through this whole monologue, I mean, Nam doesn't really say anything throughout the whole time. He's just listening, which I think was really important for Curtis's character, just to kind of get it out, in a sense, almost venting.
And something that was interesting was that you kind of flash back to earlier in the movie where Gillian is kind of giving Curtis this like kind of pep talk, and Curtis is like, but how can I be a leader with two arms? And you kind of think back to, and then you come back to like where you are in the movie, and you're like, oh, because he's the one who ate people. He couldn't cut off his own arm to give other people. So it's kind of like this thing where it's like he doesn't feel worthy because he has two arms. It's very,
definitely. And so then after this whole monologue thing and everything, you know, you kind of get more into the background of who Curtis is as a character. You then, you know, kind of go back to Nam, and he says, I don't want to open the gate to Wilford. I want to open that gate. And he points to a gate that's, the one that leads to outside the frozen wasteland that is Earth at this point in the movie. And he kind of mentions, at Yekaterina Bridge, which is like the Happy New Year bridge that they had earlier, he said he looks at something every single year on every single New Year. And what he's looking at is a plane that was crashed underneath the snow. And he mentions that 10 years ago, he could only see the tail of the plane. But this year, he saw like the body of the plane, the wings of the plane, and it'll bring you back because it shows Nam as a character, like at the Yekaterina Bridge scene, looking over. And I was looking I didn't see what he was looking at the first time they mentioned it, but they bring you back at this point in the movie, and then that's when I saw it, when I knew what I was looking for in a sense. And so then you come to find out that Nam says, oh, why is this? That's because he thinks that the ice and snow are melting, which, I mean, makes sense. If you could only see the tail 10 years ago, now you can see the whole body of the plane. I would think that it were melting too. And now you kind of get more insight into the significance of that little snowflake earlier, because he takes that to mean, there's little tiny, soft, delicate snowflakes. He takes that also as another sign that, it's getting a little warmer.
Yeah. And again, that Eskimo explained to him different types of snow, what us Florida people would not know, but don't know anything about snow. But no idea. Apparently there's different types, and it's of different intensities. So I don't know, it was interesting. So he also kind of mentions that chronal together, it is industrial waste, can be turned into a bomb, right? So Nam has these matches from his cigarette, and he has not just a bomb, he has like a flammable source. He has a bomb that he can light. And so Curtis is like, no, you can't do that. Like, why would you do that type of thing? And Nam is like, but, we can go outside. He mentions the whole snow thing. And then whatever. And so they have this fight. And so the lady that we mentioned, that we saw earlier in the yellow coat, comes back and she says, Curtis, Wilford is waiting for you. He doesn't have to, because basically Nam is the only person that can open these doors, right? And so that's why they had this fight, because he was like, Nam, open the door to the office. And Nam was like, no, I want to open the door to open the entire train. And so then this lady is like, Curtis, Wilford is waiting for you. So we finally see Wilford. We meet Wilford. We're at this divine Wilford's office where the sacred engine lies. We're at the nose of the train, and it's so weird. It's like the size of his entire office is probably the size of like half of the freeloader cart, which houses 1,000 people, versus this one Wilford. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, sure. So then, Wilford kind of starts by saying, because again, this is the first time we're seeing Wilford. To me, I thought he would be older. He's not that old. He says to him, he says later, he's like, oh, like, I'm really old, Curtis, but he didn't, not as old as I thought he was going to be, at least. The name like Wilford, kind of expects him a little older. And so then he tells Curtis, you're the first person to walk this entire train from tail to engine, which is interesting, because you would think that the creator of the train would have, not Curtis. But no.
Again, shows the disconnect from Wilford and his like actual citizens of his train.
Exactly. And so then Curtis kind of, responds to this by saying, oh, like, what, it's, too dirty for you back there? Like, you don't want to get filth on you? Or he says something to that effect. And then Wilford almost takes, he kind of takes offense to this and says in response, like, oh, my section has its drawbacks. It's noisy and lonely. Can you imagine? It's just
he's eating steaks and like by himself. Oh no, we're all in quarantine. We're by ourselves. We made it work.
That's the thing. Like, it just shows, like you were saying, like the disconnect, between the creator of this train, who's up at the front with the engine. He has no idea what it's like in the back of the train. He's never been there himself. So he, for him to complain about it being noisy and lonely at the front of the train, it's almost just like a slap in the face to Curtis, especially through everything he's been through during that first month, with the cannibalism and everything, all the way up to watching everybody he cares about die, essentially. It's just, I can't imagine. That's just, again, a slap in the face to what he's trying to do. And then, Wilford's, cooking this luxurious dinner for the two of them. He's like, oh, like, is medium rare on your steak okay? Like, you can tell he's just lived this life of luxury. And then he mentions, that everything in the train is like an ecosystem, like everything is balanced perfectly. And in the case of overpopulation, he basically says, we would kill off from the tail section of the train, like where you are. And this is kind of, again, where that 74% number comes in, like what Minister Mason mentioned at the Yekkaterina Bridge, how, 74% of you will die. He essentially says that Wilford and Gilliam came up with a plan together to kind of make this population control a reality, in a sense, to where this revolution would happen, but it was supposed to stop at the Yekkaterina Bridge when they went through that really dark tunnel. That's when it was supposed to stop. They didn't count on Curtis and Sean having those matches, and kind of creating those torches to go through. And so then, again, Curtis's father figure is now seen as a traitor by Curtis, because Gilliam, the one from the tail section of the train, is working with the creator of the train to ensure population control on their own people. It's just, you can tell, you can see it in Curtis how just enraged and like betrayed he is. He doesn't even believe it.
Which kind of makes you kind of think like maybe they kept these freeloaders with things like protein blocks and bad conditions. They kept them oppressed so that they would revolt at one point, and so that this population control would take place. You know what I mean? It was
almost as a justification to it.
Yeah, it was done on purpose. They treated them that way on purpose, and they were like, oh, it's worked thus far, like we don't, with all of these 3 other uprisings that were prior to this, so that's kind of how they maintain their population and don't go with overpopulation, which is so inhumane, but also kind of makes me think of like the Hunger Games, like,
yeah, in a sense. Yeah, he definitely has almost President Snow type energy, we'll say.
For sure.
Other than that, at that point, during their, weird kind of cold and awkward dinner, in a sense, Wilford gets on the phone and he talks on the phone to like that creepy man from earlier with a wheelbarrow full of eggs. And he, at this point, he kind of gives the order to go ahead and kill 74% of the population. But then, oh, hooray, he has a stroke of humanity and says, oh, you know what? For our 18th year, why don't you go ahead and spare 18 lives, And then the creepy man in response is like, oh, like, what a brilliant idea. Like, you're so excellent, like, amazing. Again, this movie's just enraging in a sense for how little they value the tail section lives.
And so basically at this point, Wilford is kind of convincing Curtis to take over the train. He's like, oh, I'm old and you've proven to be strong. And like, he like convinces him by saying like, you've never had a quiet moment in your life. Here you could have quiet, peace, luxury, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, he almost convinces Curtis. You can kind of see in his eyes, like he's almost convinced. He's kind of like, this engine is actually beautiful. Like he makes him sit in the engine, which is kind of weird, and like look at it and be like, look, it's an engine. Look how pretty
I didn't know
it
it was safe to even just be in there. Like,
yeah, it was kind of weird. So, and he like kind of like falls under this trance where you're like, oh my God, like, is he about to, shift gears, And then out of nowhere, you see, what's her name? Yona comes in, again, clairvoyance. She comes in, she freaks out, and she starts lifting up this floorboard. And so then Curtis starts helping her, and they lift up the floorboard, and they see Timmy, little boy Timmy, Tanya's kid, underneath the floorboard, like shifting these gears, whatever. And then Wilford says so calmly, he's like, oh, well, like underneath here, it's pretty small. A lot of things are broken in this train. We got to keep it going. I need a small kid. And you're like, you forget that whole cannibalism shock. And this is even more. You're like, oh my God, like from the beginning of the movie, you were like, something bad is about to happen to these kids. And then you see it and you're like, they literally subject them to slavery. And it was like such this like gross moment. Like, ugh.
Yeah, you just see little Timmy underneath the floorboards. Like he doesn't even notice that the floorboards opened up on top, like the lights coming in there, and he's just like digging like grime out. I think his job is to like take all like the gunk kind of out of the gears, like just all day, 24/7, just doing that. And like you're saying, Wilford just kind of casually explains. He says, oh, well, like, that part's extinct now, so little kids fit perfectly. That's why I need little kids. Like
so nonchalantly, like, exactly. Yeah, we use 7-year-olds as our slaves. no big.
Exactly. And like you were saying, like the Yona's clairvoyancy, she came in, she kind of knew under to take up that floorboard. And the reason she even came into the room in the first place is because her and Nam were fighting off. It looked like the club goers, honestly, were kind of coming in after them. I guess, payback for taking their chronol, maybe. And then the guy from the sauna room, who you thought was dead, oh no, he's alive and well. He's coming back to kind of fight them off as well. And Nam convinces Yona to get that chronol bomb on the door to the outside. And so then she's like, oh, where are the matches? Where are the matches? And Nam says that Curtis has them. So that's why she goes into that room in the first place. And then she opens up the floorboards and sees Timmy. So I will say another kind of gross scene. In order to save Timmy, Curtis almost unnecessarily, he jams his arm in between the gears in the floorboards to kind of create a resistance against it. So the gears stop turning, and Timmy, in a sense, can stop doing his work. And then when that happens, it seems the engine kind of slows down. It stops. The motor stops spinning. I don't really know any of the technical terms for trains.
Yeah,
something like that. The big thing in the front stops spinning. So other than that, when that happens, like a little tiny compartment almost opens up at the side where that motor was in the very front, and perfectly child-sized little section, I'll say. So Andy, the little boy from earlier, again, the one that got taken in addition to Timmy, crawls out from some weird bookshelf type thing. I don't even know where he comes from. He just crawls out of there and just walks over to it, and Curtis is calling Andy's name. He's saying, Andy, can you hear me? Don't go there. But Andy at this point is completely taken over by his responsibility, his new job, his role in the train. And he just climbs right into the spot, and then it just closes. And that was it. That's all we ever see of Andy.
And it just shows they don't just get their brainwashing from school, and again, you get these other motives of these kids being so lethargic to the point where they barely spoke in the beginning, and at this point they're literally just mute. They're just there. They don't even have this kind of motivation to get themselves out of the situation they're in, out of this literal slavery and abuse that they are in. They don't even move. When Curtis sticks his hand to get Timmy doesn't even try to reach for his hand. He's just there doing his work, They don't even notice. And again, this kind of lethargic acceptance of their life, kind of, you see that again. And it's so sad to
it is really sad. And you also kind of see how defeating Curtis's mission is, in a sense, because he sticks his arm in there and it's getting just crushed by the gears, because they're big metallic gears. They're heavy and they go all day long. So now that his arm is in there, it's just getting crushed at this point. And it just shows how defeating it is, because he went to go save Timmy but lost Andy in exchange, because another child-sized little section opened up at the front of the motor. It just showed, it was awful. At this point, though, I would say that when Yona opens up the floorboards, like you were saying, that's kind of what snapped Curtis out of that trance. The almost taking over.
Seeing Timmy.
Exactly, seeing Timmy. So Curtis, gives the matches to Yona and is able to get Timmy out. And this is kind of all, it's happening back and forth. The camera kind of flashes between, the igniting chronol, in a sense, I guess, the match and fuse going to the chronol, and then Curtis trying to get Timmy out from underneath the floorboard. So he's reaching, like you were saying, Timmy's not really even noticing. He's just kind of doing his work still. And, you never really see it, but you do hear horrible sound of bones crunching. It says that in the subtitles. It literally says bones crunching. So it's kind of alluded to that Curtis gets his arm, upper arm, kind of forearm area cut off. So at this point, he is able to get Timmy out from the floorboards, but it's, his arm is taken in exchange, in a sense. So this kind of goes back to his talk with Nam, how he was saying, oh, I was never able to sacrifice my arm before, I could never do it. And now at this point, at the end of the movie, he's finally come full circle, and he was able to sacrifice his arm.
And be a leader. As he said earlier, how can I be a leader with two arms?
Exactly.
But the catch with that is that you barely see his arm cut off.
You don't even see it. You just hear it.
You really just hear it. And you kind of see a little bit for a split second, kind of his arm, the front of his arm in blood, but you don't see anything else. And a split second later is when Yona is setting off this bomb to get out of the train, and you kind of have this like such like a kind of heartwarming moment where Timmy is no longer in this like little area. He's up, and you see Nom and Curtis kind of run towards Yona and Timmy, the two youngest there, and hug them, kind of like for protection. And it was so emotional because Yona is obviously Nom's daughter, and Nom was very like loving towards her throughout the movie. And Curtis made this promise to Tanya to find Timmy and keep him safe in a sense. And Tanya said thank you. And so kind of his protection for him and Nom's protection for Yona was like so emotional. And then the bomb goes off of Chronal, the bomb of Chronal goes off. And you kind of first you see the the bottom third, the tail of the train kind of stop completely, kind of like shake around, whatever. And then the middle of the train falls off a cliff, and then the front of the train is where the bomb was. So obviously you'd assume everyone is dead in there. And you kind of see Yona get up. She's like crying. She's like, Dad, Dad. And like she runs around. She has her coat on. And you kind of see her walk towards like where the door to the outside is and like look up, because at this point it's like above her. And she looks up and she's like, there's snow on her. And they're in this like dark room with fire and like inside. And as she looks up, it's kind of like this little kind of column of just light and snow. And she looks up and she freaks out, or not freaks out, but she's like, oh my God. And so you kind of, the next scene you see is just this white screen and Yona's boot, and she kind of just like steps in the snow, and she's kind of taking all in, and she doesn't freeze immediately. And so you know at this point that it's a livable, they're in a livable environment. The Earth is no longer not livable. And kind of like Timmy runs up to her, and it's kind of just them two. And the last scene is you see a polar bear on the like cliff, or on like
it's like in the distance.
It's like in the distance you see a polar bear, which can signify one of two things. One being that there's life on Earth and like it's a livable environment that they're in. And two, it's kind of like this ironic little take on like, you know, you think of climate change and global warming and you think of polar bears dying, and in this sense the people are dead and the polar bears are alive and like they're well. And it's just like a very interesting, like, you know, yeah. And also you kind of think about the fact like, oh, if the polar bears are alive now, then they've had to have been alive for the past 17 years, you know, so there were living things on the Earth. So that was very interesting, and thus the movie is concluded.
Yeah, that was the end of the movie, and I was surprised coming towards the end of the movie. I mean, I enjoy movies that don't have, you know, that cookie cutter happy ending with like, you know, I probably wouldn't have been happy with an ending, you know, Curtis taking over as leader of the train now, and like, you know, I probably wouldn't have been happy with that ending. So I much, you know, I like an unexpected twist at the end, and this movie definitely gave that to me. So that's why I like the movie. I like, you know, unexpected things at the end. But I would say that I feel like I say this every time when you and I talk about the movies before we go on. I thought there was going to be like 5 or 10 minutes more of the movie.
Yeah.
Like I say that a lot. I wasn't expecting it to end there. Yeah. But I liked how it ended.
Me too, I enjoyed it. For sure. I loved the ending. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, this movie, you go in thinking it's just going to be a plain, whatever, action movie, sci-fi, like a little interesting twist. Like, you know, everything's snowing. Like, it's called Snowpiercer. I mean, you don't really think anything of it. But it was definitely way more in-depth and deeper than I expected. You know, there's little nuances throughout the film that I wasn't, you know, anticipating. I liked it a lot.
I liked it a lot, too.
Me too. So I guess, I mean, that's pretty much all that I have. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Dina?
No, that's all.
No? All right. Well, we'll be here again next week, Tuesday at 7. We're reviewing Uncut Gems. So make sure to come back for that one. Yeah, and let us know if you like Snowpiercer.
Bye.